Hello, everyone. My name is Nikhil Sadaranganey. I'm a junior studying political science with minors in economics and philosophy. I'm a Gardner Fellow for the year 2020-2021, and I'm here today to talk to you about my project, which is the State of Our Union, pro and anti-statist presidential rhetoric between the years 1932 and 2020. And my project was done under the guidance of Dr. Lisa Miller. So the question I wanted to address is, how did we get here? At the beginning of 2020, shortly after the beginning of the pandemic and the beginning of lockdown in many states across the country, there was an outpouring of anti-government sentiment to mask mandates, to stay-at-home orders. And the question that kept coming to my mind is, how did we get to a place where Americans are protesting these sorts of restrictions? And I wanted to look back to another time of crisis in American history, which was the Great Depression, World War II, and see what the role of government was then and how we've come from the role of government being so present in everyday lives compared to today, and what has changed, but particularly how presidential rhetoric has impacted the role of government and the implementation of social policy. So this led me to the study of anti-statism, which is simply defined as opposition to intervention by the state in social and economic affairs. And there are a number of lenses through which we can look at this issue. One would be traditional American liberalism, race, and political fragmentation. And my ultimate research question was, what does pro and anti-statist rhetoric look like, and how does it change over time, particularly when it comes from the President of the United States? So in order to investigate this question further, I read through 35 presidential State of the Union speeches between the years 1932 and 2020. And I looked primarily for pro and anti-statist rhetoric, which is defined here. The language and policy proposals that empower government compared to language and policy proposals that favor either state and local government or depicts the national government as incompetent or overreaching. And you can see a few quotes here to illustrate examples of both sides. Over the course of the research that I did, there were three prevailing themes that started to emerge. One was the state and local government versus the national government, and kind of the battle for power there, and the battle not only for power, but for leadership on certain issues. Family and community versus the government. So what is kind of the smallest political unit, as I put it in the writing? Where do presidents direct people's attention to solving problems? Is it at home? Is it in the community? Or is it through the government? And finally, private versus public sector. So where does the president look to for innovation, problem solving to occur in society? Is it in business and industry, or is it through, again, the national government? So the findings are laid out in this table. On the left side, you'll see the themes, and on the right side, you'll see the examples of both pro and anti-statist sides of those themes. So as you can see here, there's a pretty common trend. You have Presidents Johnson, Kennedy, and Truman on the pro-state side, whereas you have Presidents Eisenhower, Nixon, and Ford, obviously reflecting both Democratic and Republican leanings in the former and latter there. And I think what the biggest thing we were able to draw out of this research was that presidential rhetoric has been increasingly pragmatic or cost-based, while policy proposals have skewed towards relying on the private sector. This is something that was brought up, especially around the late 70s and early 80s, of course, the rise of like the Reagan era. And then contrary to assertions by thinkers like Hartz, pro-statist rhetoric does not contradict American values, since conservatives have had a history of embracing pro-statist ideas, particularly conservatives and Republicans like President Eisenhower. And faith in government as a problem solver has declined drastically since the Reagan era, since this concerted effort to portray the national government as incompetent and overreaching and going beyond its calling in many ways. But we do have a glimmer of hope moving forward, especially when you kind of look at the similarities between these two crises, the Great Depression and now the pandemic, both what they've done economically as well as socially. President Biden's joint address to Congress at the end of April 2021 was, as you can see from the headline here, incredibly ambitious compared to what we've seen even from Democratic presidents in recent years. So there seems to be hope on the horizon to reverse these trends of anti-government, anti-national government sentiment in the United States, as a lot of his proposals involve the national government being highly involved in many facets of everyday life, including healthcare, education, and things of that nature. So overall, the research was incredibly rewarding and yielded a number of fascinating trends that were explored through the three themes that I pointed out to earlier.